She didn't see your worth. And the thing about being overlooked by someone you care about, someone you gave your time, your effort, your patience to, it leaves an ache that isn't loud but constant. It's the kind of pain that doesn't scream for attention, but rather settles quietly into the corners of your life. You stayed thinking your loyalty would be enough, that your consistency, your small daily sacrifices, your silent support in the background would one day be recognized. But she didn't notice, did she? She didn't see you praying for her when things were falling apart. She didn't see the way you held back your own dreams to support hers. She didn't see how many battles you fought silently, fears you swallowed, stress you absorbed, all so she could feel secure. And the truth is, she didn't even ask. You were always there, and that presence, that reliability, became something she assumed would never leave. This is the part people don't talk about. The moment when someone shifts from appreciating you to expecting you. The transition is subtle. One day your efforts are met with gratitude, and the next they're met with silence, with a kind of entitlement. You start to feel less like a person and more like a fixture, a background character in her life story. But here's the thing, there's something sacred about being underestimated. It's painful, yes, but it's also clarifying. When someone takes you for granted, they reveal exactly how they see you. It's an unintentional confession. They tell you, without words, that they think your presence is guaranteed, that your patience is infinite, that your kindness will never run out. And that illusion they hold, that you'll always be there no matter what, it's the very thing that blinds them to your value. People don't cherish what they believe they can't lose, so they ignore, they dismiss, they downplay, and you're left sitting in that growing silence, wondering how your love turned into a convenience. That kind of experience does something to a person. It matures you. It forces you to confront what love really means, what self-respect actually demands. Because at some point, being taken for granted is no longer a reflection of her blindness. It becomes a reflection of your tolerance. Now, I'm not saying you should have walked away the first time she ignored your effort. Love requires patience, relationships require work. But what I am saying is that when a pattern forms, when disregard becomes a rhythm, you need to recognize what's happening. You were not created to be an afterthought. You were not made to be tolerated. You were meant to be seen, heard, known. There's an irony in being the one who gives the most and receives the least. It's that deep down, part of you believed that your love could change her. That if you just gave a little more, waited a little longer, sacrificed a little deeper, she'd finally wake up, finally notice, finally understand. But that's not love, that's martyrdom. And it's a heavy cross to carry alone. When you're overlooked long enough, you start to shrink. You start second-guessing your worth. You wonder, maybe I'm not enough. But let me tell you something, that's a lie. A dangerous, corrosive lie. You were always enough. The problem wasn't your lack of value, it was her lack of vision. People who take others for granted rarely recognize the cost until it's too late. It's only when the silent supporter walks away, when the consistent one finally goes silent, that they feel the weight of their absence. That's the moment when regret begins to grow, because now she's no longer comparing you to who you were. She's comparing you to who you've become without her. And that transformation, it began right here, in this space of being overlooked. This was the furnace. This was the pressure that refined you, tested you, and ultimately revealed you to yourself. And while she was busy assuming you'd always stay, you were becoming someone she wouldn't be able to reach. That's the beauty of being taken for granted. Yes, beauty. Because it exposes the truth about people. But even more, it uncovers the truth about you. You begin to realize that your value never depended on her recognition. That you don't need applause to be valuable or attention to be meaningful. It hurts, but it's holy. Because pain like that awakens something inside. It turns quiet loyalty into confident clarity. It shifts your identity from someone who waits to someone who walks forward. And once you've seen your worth through that lens, you don't go back. You don't beg. You don't explain. You rise. And when you rise, she'll notice. Not because you've become arrogant, but because she finally sees what she so carelessly ignored. What she missed, heaven recorded. And that is not just poetic, it's fundamentally true in ways most people never fully realize. See, just because she didn't acknowledge your value doesn't mean your value disappeared. That's the illusion. When someone important to us overlooks us, we're tempted to internalize that blindness. We start questioning our own worth based on someone else's lack of recognition. But here's the truth you need to settle deep within yourself. Your value is not diminished just because someone refuses to see it. She may have ignored your heart, your effort, your loyalty, but you weren't invisible, not to the one who matters. There's a kind of divine accountability woven into reality itself. When people treat others carelessly, there are consequences, not just moral ones, but spiritual ones. Every act of patience you extended, every time you held your tongue when you had every right to speak up, every small gesture of grace you offered in silence, those things were seen. They were witnessed by something greater than her fleeting attention span or emotional immaturity. You weren't overlooked by life. You were documented by eternity. And here's what's staggering about that. Often, when someone takes us for granted, we become obsessed with proving ourselves to them. We want to be seen so badly that we exhaust ourselves trying to perform, to earn recognition that was never ours to chase in the first place. But when you understand that God saw what she ignored, something in you begins to shift. You stop trying to win her approval and start walking in alignment with something far more profound, purpose. Because purpose doesn't need permission. It doesn't require applause. It simply needs you to show up, to stop shrinking just because someone else couldn't comprehend your depth. She didn't see it? That's okay. She wasn't meant to be the one who validated you. Her rejection, it was a filter. It clarified your path. It removed the distraction of needing her to get it so you could finally become who you were always meant to be. There's a painful but liberating moment when you realize that some people had front row seats to your growth and still chose to look away. And that's on them. That blindness is their burden. But your job, your responsibility, is to rise anyway. To stop waiting for them to notice and start honoring the quiet truth that's been burning inside you all along. It's easy to feel like you're unseen when the people closest to you fail to acknowledge your efforts. But don't confuse being unseen by man with being unseen by God. The very fabric of your being was knit with intention. Your thoughts, your tears, your dreams, they're not trivial, they're sacred. They matter. And not just in some vague sentimental way, they matter in a way that echoes through your entire story. What she missed wasn't just your love, it was your calling. People often confuse consistency with weakness. They think because you're always there, you'll always be there. They interpret grace as passivity, kindness as neediness, presence as dependence. But they're wrong. Consistency is not weakness. It's strength, it's discipline, it's character. And character will always outlast charisma. Always. While she was overlooking you, heaven was preparing you. She saw the now. You carried the not yet. And that's why she couldn't understand your value. You were still in the process of becoming. There's a certain kind of person who only recognizes worth after it's validated by success. But heaven doesn't wait for applause. Heaven works in silence, in stillness, in obscurity, in those lonely seasons where you're giving more than you're receiving, staying when you feel like walking, building while others are sleeping. So don't despise those seasons. Don't look back and wish she had seen you, because her failure to see was the very thing that kept you humble, kept you grounded, kept you depending on something greater than her approval. It was her disregard that pushed you deeper into purpose. And that purpose, that's what will ultimately distinguish you. Regret doesn't come because you failed to meet someone's expectations. Regret comes when someone finally realizes they mishandled something irreplaceable. One day she'll look back and remember the way you loved, the way you supported, the way you stayed when it would have been easier to walk. And that memory will sting, not because you became... So you don't have to prove anything now. You don't need to force her to see what she chose to ignore, Because what she missed, heaven has not only seen, it has already started to bless her disregard. Didn't destroy you, it developed you. That's not just a comforting idea, it's a hard truth that life will eventually force you to confront. The pain she caused didn't end you, it shaped you. And there's something important about understanding that, something necessary, even urgent, about refusing to let yourself believe that suffering was meaningless. You see, we are so quick to think that pain equals failure, that when someone treats us like we don't matter, it's a reflection of our inadequacy. But that's not how transformation works. Pain, especially emotional pain, is not just something to endure, it's something that instructs. Pain is the great clarifier. It burns away illusions, it reveals motives, it peels back the surface of who we thought we were and forces us to look directly at what's underneath. Her disregard forced you to look at yourself, didn't it? Not because you were wrong, not because you lacked something, but because your soul needed to wake up. You had to confront what you'd been allowing, what you'd been tolerating, and let's be honest, what you'd been excusing in the name of love. You thought patience was enough. You thought your sacrifice would lead to appreciation, but instead it led to silence, to coldness, to being treated like your presence was optional, and that broke something in you. It had to, because some things can only be rebuilt once they've been broken. Not everything needs to be preserved. Some versions of yourself need to be shattered, and her disregard was the hammer that did it. That's not to say it was fair, it wasn't, and it's not to say it didn't hurt, it did. But fairness isn't the metric by which life shapes us. Growth doesn't care about fairness. Growth cares about truth. And the truth is that what she failed to cherish taught you what you can no longer ignore. You are not disposable. You are not second tier. And you are not a background character in your own life. You didn't choose that pain. You didn't ask for it. But you can choose what it becomes. You can let it make you bitter, or you can let it build you. That's the critical distinction. That's where your power is. Because her actions are out of your control, but your response, that's entirely yours. And what's remarkable, what's actually awe-inspiring, is that you didn't retaliate. You didn't become like her. You didn't lower yourself to her indifference. No, you chose something harder. You let the pain teach you. You let it press you deeper into maturity. You started asking the questions that actually matter. Who am I when no one claps? Who am I when love is not returned? Who am I when loyalty is not reciprocated? And it's in those moments, in the isolation, in the confusion, in the emotional fog, that character is born. Not the kind of character you perform for others, but the kind that lives inside your spine. The kind that steadies you when people walk away. The kind that doesn't need an audience to do what's right. That is who you were becoming, even as she was turning away. That's the irony of it all. She thought she was walking away from something she understood, but what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that you were still in process. You were becoming, and sometimes people misjudge us because they mistake our current form for our final form. She saw the version of you that was still learning how to set boundaries, still hoping to be seen, still afraid of being alone. But that's not who you are anymore, is it? Her disregard was the fire, but you're the gold. You're what's left after the heat has done its work. You're stronger now, not colder, stronger. And there's a difference. Cold people shut down, lash out, numb themselves to survive. Strong people stay open. They feel it all and they grow anyway. They learn how to rise, how to speak, how to walk with dignity, even after being dragged through silence and dismissal. You didn't just survive that season, you were refined by it, and the person you've become, the version of you who no longer begs to be chosen, who no longer justifies neglect, who no longer trades peace for proximity, that person is a direct result of her disregard. So in a way you can thank her. Not because she was right, not because she did you a favor, but because her inability to honor you became the very soil where your future was planted. And when she sees you now, calm, centered, thriving, she'll feel something she never expected, the weight of what she lost. You didn't beg to be seen. You let God reveal you. And that is one of the most powerful choices a person can make. Because when you've been dismissed, when someone treats your love as if it's replaceable, the temptation to shout, to prove, to force them to see what they missed, it's overwhelming. But you didn't do that. You didn't scream for validation. You didn't fall into the trap of performing your pain just to make her feel guilty. You chose a different path, a much harder one. You let silence speak for you. And that's not weakness. That's restraint. That's power under control. When you choose to rise quietly instead of retaliate loudly, it means you've reached a depth of self-awareness that no amount of shouting can produce. Because let's be honest, people who hurt us rarely hear us when we're hurting. They don't listen when they're too busy justifying their actions. So yelling would have done nothing. Pleading would have cheapened your dignity. What you did instead, you turned your energy inward. You took your pain to the secret place. You let it deepen your prayers, refine your focus, and transform your identity. That's what growth actually looks like. It's not always visible. Sometimes it's boring, it's private. You wake up and do the inner work. You confront your fears. You face your need for external approval. You walk away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally realized she never truly did. And it's in that moment, that quiet, decisive moment, when your spirit matures. Because now you're no longer chasing closure from a person who doesn't even have the capacity to offer it. You've outgrown the conversation you once thought you needed. The truth is, when someone overlooks you, they expect you to crumble. They expect you to shrink, to spiral, to start questioning your own value. And that's exactly why your silence, your strength, your composure, it's shocking. It speaks louder than any outburst ever could. She thought she broke you, but what she really did was expose the strength you didn't even know you had. So you didn't need to convince her to stay, because deep down you started realizing that the moment someone needs convincing, the connection is already broken. You weren't asking for too much, you were asking the wrong person. And once that truth landed, really landed, your posture shifted. You no longer waited by the phone. You no longer lost sleep replaying old conversations. You no longer exhausted yourself trying to figure out what more you could have done. Because it wasn't about doing more, it was about realizing you were enough all along. This is something beautiful, holy even, about rising without resentment, about choosing peace when you've been offered chaos. That's not detachment, it's discipline. It's a refusal to let someone else's disregard define your future. It's a decision to protect your energy, your soul, your calling. And make no mistake, people notice that kind of strength. Eventually she'll notice. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but there will come a moment when she thinks back when life goes quiet and she remembers you not as someone who begged, but as someone who walked away with grace. And that memory will haunt her far more than any confrontation ever could. Because regret isn't born from being yelled at. It's born from silence, from that deep, aching realization that someone you thought would always be there finally stopped waiting. You didn't retaliate. You didn't slander her. You didn't broadcast your heartbreak for sympathy. You chose elevation. You chose discipline. And that is what makes your rise so powerful. Because it wasn't reaction, it was revelation. It wasn't fueled by vengeance, it was fueled by vision. You saw who you were becoming, and you refused to let bitterness blur that path. And while she thought you were withdrawing, what was really happening is that you were aligning with a greater version of yourself, aligning with purpose, aligning with peace. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on another person's understanding or validation. The kind of peace that holds you steady when everything else is shaking. You didn't beg to be seen, you let God reveal you. And now the light that shines from you is not the light of someone trying to be noticed, it's the light of someone who has already been found. She thought you were replaceable until she tried to replace you. And that realization didn't come with fireworks or some dramatic moment of clarity. It came slowly, quietly, in the subtle emptiness of conversations that didn't feel the same, in the quiet disconnection with people who didn't carry the depth you carried, in the contrast between what she thought she wanted and what she actually had when she got it. That's the thing about being deeply present in someone's life. When you go, there's a weight that gets lifted, but not in the way they expected. At first, it feels like freedom to them, like space, like relief. But over time, the absence starts to speak. And it doesn't speak loudly, it whispers. It shows up in moments they didn't anticipate, in the silence after an unfulfilling interaction, in the longing that follows, shallow laugh, and the realization that love isn't just about excitement, it's about stability, about safety, about someone showing up over and over when no one else does. You see, when someone has grown accustomed to your presence, they assume it's permanent. They believe it's a given. They confuse your consistency for simplicity. And then they chase novelty, not understanding that not everything that glitters is gold. Some of it is fool's gold, temporary, flashy, but hollow. And what she's finding out now, maybe too late, is that the people who sparkle in a moment often can't withstand a season. She thought the connection was replaceable because she didn't understand the cost of building it. She forgot the effort it took to get to the point where you could sit in silence and still feel understood. She forgot the loyalty it took for you to stay when you didn't feel appreciated. She forgot the kind of self-restraint it took for you not to give up when it would have been easier to walk away. And when she stepped out, when she chose attention over depth, convenience over character, she thought she was trading up, but what she really did was downgrade, and she only started to see it once the silence settled in. There's a moment always where people start comparing, not out of ego, but out of emptiness. They remember the way you listened, the way you loved, the way you stayed calm in storms they didn't know they were creating. And they start trying to replicate that with someone new. But here's what they find. You can copy the setting, but not the substance. You can recreate the external details, the dates, the smiles, the rhythms, but you can't fake presence. You can't replicate the soul of someone who loved you without conditions. And that's what haunts people. Not the loss itself, but the loss of what could have been, the future they sabotaged, the loyalty they mishandled, the quiet strength they disrespected. That's what stings when they lay awake at night and realize they didn't just lose a partner, they lost something sacred. You weren't replaceable, you were rare. But the only way for her to see that was for you to walk away, because sometimes people don't understand value until it's absent, until they're left with versions of relationships that look full but feel empty, until they're surrounded by people who want something from them but don't know how to carry them. That's the cost of waking up too late. And while she's realizing that, you're changing. You're not standing still waiting for her to come back. No. You're evolving, healing, building, becoming. You're no longer the person who tolerated her indifference. You're no longer trying to prove you're worth staying for. That version of you died in the silence she left behind. And what's risen in its place is someone who knows that peace is worth more than proximity, and self-respect is more precious than being chosen by someone who only saw your worth in hindsight. You didn't need to compete. You didn't need to rush to replace her like she did you, because you understood that healing isn't a race, it's a revelation. You gave yourself time to feel it all, the rejection, the disappointment, the betrayal, and in doing so, you walked through fire and came out refined. That's not just survival, that's redemption. That's growth earned the hard way. So now, if she looks back, and you know she will, she won't just see what she lost, she'll see what she could never replace. Because you weren't just a chapter in her story, you were the turning point. And when someone misses that, when they trade depth for distraction, they always come to regret it. Not because you've become bitter, but because you've become better. She thought you were replaceable until she realized you were the one thing she'll never find again. You didn't chase her when she walked away. And that's where everything changed. That's when the shift happened. Not just in how she saw you, but in how you saw you. Because walking away is one thing. People do it all the time out of fear, pride, confusion, immaturity. But what breaks the pattern is what happens next. Do you chase? Do you plead? Do you fold yourself smaller, hoping to become easier to love? Or do you hold your ground, even as it shakes beneath your feet? You chose to stand still. And that stillness, don't underestimate its power, it echoed. It said something louder than any words ever could. I'm not going to abandon myself. just because you abandoned me. That moment right there was the beginning of your transformation. Because when you didn't run after her, you sent a message not just to her, but to yourself, that your peace, your dignity, your worth weren't up for negotiation. It wasn't ego, it wasn't stubbornness, it was alignment. You finally understood that love, real love, doesn't demand that you lose yourself to keep it. That if someone can leave so easily, maybe they were never really with you to begin with. And that's a bitter pill to swallow, especially when you gave them your softness, your loyalty, your effort. But somewhere in the silence that followed her absence, you heard something deeper than pain. You heard truth. You learned that chasing someone who chooses to walk away is a betrayal of your own soul, that love, to be love, must be reciprocal. And anything else, anything one-sided, will eventually starve you. She thought her exit would shatter you. Maybe she even expected you to fall apart, but what she didn't expect was your calm, your restraint, your decision to let her go without a scene. And that's what stays with her now. Not a dramatic fight, not a desperate phone call, but the quiet realization that she walked away from someone who wasn't going to beg her to stay. There's something incredibly unsettling for them when they realize you never came chasing. Not because you didn't care, but because you finally cared enough about yourself to stop chasing people who are comfortable with your absence. That's what haunts them, that they were so sure you'd run after them, and you didn't. And in that space they expected to fill with power and control, they found emptiness. Because all their assumptions about you, about what you'd tolerate, were wrong. She thought leaving would make you chase, but all it did was make you rise. And let's not pretend that it was easy. It took everything in you to stay still when your heart wanted to run. It took discipline to hold your tongue when your ego screamed for closure. It took courage to sit in the silence and trust that if someone can leave you that easily, they were never capable of the kind of love you deserve. And now the silence speaks for you. It speaks of strength, of boundaries, of self-respect. It tells a story louder than any retaliation or apology ever could. She sees it now. In moments when life slows down, when the noise dies out and she's left with her thoughts, she sees it. The image of you not chasing her becomes clearer with time. It starts to burn. It starts to challenge the story she told herself when she left. Because that story only works if you fall apart without her, but you didn't. You grew, you healed, you moved quietly, intentionally. You didn't post about it. You didn't throw shade. You simply built a life that no longer includes her, and you did it with dignity. And now, as she scrolls through a highlight reel of shallow moments and temporary connections, she begins to see what she traded, and worse, what she can't get back. Because when someone doesn't chase, it doesn't always mean they didn't care. Sometimes it means they finally woke up and they realized that their time, their love, their loyalty are gifts. And if those gifts aren't valued, they'll take them elsewhere. Not in anger, but in awareness. That's where you are now. Aware, grounded. No longer needing to be chosen to know your worth. No longer trying to prove yourself to someone who is blind to your value. And that's what makes this ending beautiful. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it didn't break you. In fact, it made you. So if she ever looks back, and she will, she won't see the person who chased. She'll see the one who stood tall in silence. And she'll realize that losing you wasn't just a mistake. It was the moment she walked away from the best thing she never even understood. And you never had to chase her to prove your value. You only had to let her go to reveal it.